on your side?
I can hear it. I can hear you.
Okay, we are recording. Welcome, everyone. This is a participatory class, so I appreciate it if you could put on your camera. That would be helpful. And we are going to get started here. And I'm going to start at the beginning in case, because I see there's a lot of new faces on here. And there's Vicky Chandler too, so she'll know some of this. So we got some experience on here. So that would appreciate it. So let me
I love
share.
seeing all these people.
Share my screen. Okay. Oh yeah. Compliance series always gets nice turnout. So thank you, Michelle. Can
Yes.
everyone see the screen? All right.
Yes.
All right. This is on the RPA, the contract, and documents that are automatically tied to the RPA. This class is designed to help you fill out the RPA. I'll bring in some legal issues with the RPA to show you what's important or not. The good part is they redesigned the RPA recently, and I call it now Contract for Dummies because it really just puts all the stuff in boxes and tells you what to do. But if you don't know those contracts and what to do, we're going to go through that right now. And this is going to be how to fill out the contract. It's not going to be comprehensive on all the legal and ramifications of the contract. That is a different type of training, but we're going to get through most of that today. So I'm just going to start at the very beginning. You guys know you get your docs at car forms. You log in through your transaction site, access zip forms. You put your login in, and it gets you to the car forms, which if you're a new agent and don't know this, you get this from your association membership. They'll send you a link. You need to sign into your car and access the forms, but it will look like this. For those of you who are more experienced, you already know about this. Some of you who are not, this will be new to you. And I have a new teaching one. Actually, I want to make a new one. So what you would do is for a transaction, you'd make a new one. We're going to say a new purchase offer, and you can put name. I just put teaching RPA. So I'm going to put residential and save it. And it opens up a particular transaction for you. You can go straight to documents, which I like to do. All forms are here. And you can go down and right up top, there is going to be the buyer broker agreement and the original purchase agreement. I'm going to click that. It opens it here. And I just open the form and it pulls it in. Well, the form is, did the form go in? Oh, there it is. Can everyone see the form now? Okay. I want to note one thing. Uh, uh, please note that this is called a workspace, and there's weird things. You can add docs to this, but if you come back into the transaction later and open it up, it's going to ask if you want a separate workflow or this workspace. So just note you can have docs in different workspaces, but in the same file. I don't know if that makes sense. So you may want your contract in one workspace and your seller disclosures in another, just to note that. Also, one of the things some agents and old school agents like to use cover sheets. There is a cover sheet in that forms thing. If you want to add a form, there's a cover sheet in there. And that fills out the docs. I don't recommend as a new agent you start with the cover sheet just because cover sheet does cover about 80% to 90% of the contract, but it does miss things in the contract, check boxes and certain things that are not on the cover sheet that are on the contract. And I always could tell as a listing agent when I receive a contract and they use the cover sheet because I know there's stuff missing and I have to do a super long counter offer to clean up the contract. Does this make sense? So please be aware. So the first document that you always get in the contract is always disclosure regarding agency relationship. I just want to touch on this shortly. Just as a broker, you do have a fiduciary duty of utmost care, integrity, honesty, and loyalty with the seller or buyer in this case. Doesn't exercise a reasonable care and performance of agent's duties. I want to talk about that right now. If you are investigated by the DRE and you say, DRE, I did make a mistake, but I didn't know it was a mistake, they don't care. You have a diligent exercise of reasonable skill. They expect you to know as a licensee. So if you're in an investigation of DRE on a contract or something that went wrong, and they say you should have known, and you said I don't know, but I should have known, you're guilty still. So just FYI, that's why you should hang on to these compliance series because it will affect your reasonable skill. Honest and fair dealings and good faith, and you have a duty to disclose. And this is a big thing. This is not this training. You have a requirement to disclose off a visual inspection on the property or that you are selling. The number one way agents get sued is off of that visual inspection or lack of or deficient visual inspection. So, but that's another class. That's actually week 3 of this class. So you can be on 2 more weeks. We'll talk about the agent visual inspection disclosure. Just want to put that in there. Buyer signs. You put your sign. You put your brokerage license here. What's the brokerage license number? Does everyone know? If you don't know, it's 014854473. So it's going to be 014854773. That is always the brokerage's number, license number for those of you new. And then obviously you would put your personal license here. And if you're a good agent, you'll know that. So I want to talk. Okay, now we're to the contract, which is super exciting. Date prepared. This has nothing to do with the contract, the date prepared. You should put a date in. It's only for reference purposes. So this is in case you wrote different offers or multiple offers. You can all say that the contract prepared on August 5th. So it's a way for you to reference the doc, but it does not play to anything that is actually in the contract itself. This is offer from. Now you have the ability to put in multiple buyers or tenants in this case, but multiple buyers, and you can put up to 4 buyers in there, which is pretty awesome. So now here's what I want to tell you. So buyer 1, buyer 1, and then buyer 2, buyer 3, and you'll see that show up on the form. Now, see, it shows up like that, so I'll put there. Now, here's the big thing I want you to understand about the name. Now, most of the time you're going to have buyers. They're just going to have their names or they're buying it as an individual. But sometimes you're going to have entities that purchase the property, okay? If entities purchase the property, there's always going to be an entity like, I don't know, Barnato LLC, and I'm the buyer. I'm the actual person, individual, but you have to put the entity's name in the buyer line. And they sign as a representative of the entity. So if you have investors that are LLCs, sometimes people, I have a trust, so we buy homes in our trust, for example. Anytime there's an AC, you would put the name in there, not the individual agent name. So in this case, I could put like, John Barnato Family Trust. That make sense? And that would be the buyer, so to speak. So make sure you know if they're buying an entity, a trust, or what kind of buyer. And remember, don't put the individual name. Don't put John Barnato if it's a trust, even though I'm the signer. Put the entity name in there. Property is obviously address. That's pretty self-explanatory. One thing I see that the cover sheet doesn't cover is the county. We will require the county on our auditing, so please put the county in there as well, but it won't be covered by your sheet. Or if you MLS connect it as well to the listing, you can connect your transaction to an MLS listing. If you do, it will populate that, but it won't populate the county. Also, APNs are important for accuracy. Generally, escrows won't go off the address, they'll go off the APN for their title stuff. If your APN's wrong, it'll cause confusion. So make sure you're putting that in there. Does everyone know you can get your APN off the MLS listing? This should be listed there as well. So any questions on that? All right, we're going to disclosure of agency relationship. This is where agents mess up all the time. So say this is a dual agency, really 5473. Now for names of the brokerage, you can use Keller Williams Realty, KW Sac Metro. Those are the approved ones. KW Fair Oaks, KW Central Valley, if you want to as well. No, Capital Valley, sorry. Those are the approved names right now, but you can just use Keller Williams Realty. Now, here's a trick. If you're doubling in it, obviously you would check the both buyer and signed dual agent. See that? Dual agent, both buyer signed right there. That if you check both there, you notice it also checks the buy side. So if you're saying I'm dual agent, it automatically assumes you're on the sell side and the buy side of this, which in California we're allowed to, a dual agency. We'll talk a bit later about what that means and how you have to handle those. Those are more tricky. The number one lawsuits that agents get sued on is dual agency transactions. So be careful on those. There's a lot of laws in that. So just want you to know one thing. If it's a different agent at a different corporation, then you would check different for individual and say it was Remax, right? And some other agent, you put the agent's name in there, Chris Jones, right? Or something like that, right? And you would put their listing number in there from the MLS. I don't know what you would put the brokerage listing number, which will be an MLS, and it'll be the listing license number. I mean, the license number, which will be an MLS as well. So you need to fill that out. Now, if they're individual. Now, here's a caveat. This is a super tricky part. If you're doing a contract, it's different agents, but both of you are in the same office. That means you're part of our brokerage. You're two different agents, but same brokerage. It is considered a dual agency transaction still by DRE standards. So it could be Keller Williams Realty, but it could be Chris Jones and Keller Williams Realty, Jonathan Barnato, and it is still a dual agency transaction because they're at the same brokerage. Does that make sense? Okay. One thing to note, just because they're at KW doesn't mean they're at the same brokerage. If they're at another KW office that is not ours, that is not a dual agency transaction, even though they are KW. It's only if they are our brokerage where I am the broker, and you guys should know where that is. So, any questions on that? There's C here, which is more than one broker to represent seller. This is if there's an additional broker in this between these two. There should not be. You should not be doing co-broker things in there without broker approval, just FYI. So, okay, this is the fun part. Let's do the purchase price. Say we're going to buy a house for $500,000. You would just type in 500 there. If it is an all cash deal, you would check all cash. If it's not all cash, don't check it. Close of escrow. I recommend 30 days as typical. If you can go fast, typically you can go less than that. Talk with your lender. If there's a loan involved, please, this is where you as an agent work with your lender. Please get with your lender on the exact time they need to close. Obviously, that's going to be helpful for you writing sexy offers. The lower you can get below 30, the better. Longer than 30 is typically seen as a long escrow, and you probably have to have certain justifications for that, or their offer won't be accepted. I don't recommend putting a date because you can put a date of close of escrow at 8/29. It may take us a week of going back and forth on counter offers to get it done, and still that date would set unless we changed it in a counter offer. So I do recommend going just a straight date if you can. Expiration offers is usually 3 calendar days or August 5th. You can put what you want. Some agents write offers and they write it with like 1 day response period because they're trying to press you, especially on new listings. They'll try to press you with an offer and it's usually low, but they'll say accept it right away and respond. As a listing agent, don't feel stressed by that. Ask for 3 days. If they're trying to press you at a low amount and you're right at the beginning of the listing, just push them back. So just be aware of that. If you're a buyer side and you want to push this as a closer than 3 days, business days for them to accept, generally you only see those things on like cash offers that are really good offers. So they're a really good offer or a cash offer that's very strong, that you'll see that kind of where they can sort of demand a quicker response time because you are giving the seller essentially what they want. Any questions on those, A, B, C? Good. Do you see how this is like real estate contracts for dummies? Because they literally just put a box for everything you need to do, which I love. I love this actually. Initial deposit. This is the deposit. We call this the buyer's deposit, or sometimes it's referred to as the earnest money deposit. You'll hear all those terms: initial deposit, buyer's deposit, earnest money deposit. They're all the same thing. They're just terms that have been used over the years to identify this. This is an amount, and usually it's a percentage. So typically, on average, in the greater Sacramento area, typically you'll want to deposit around 1% of the purchase price. So if they're doing a $500,000 purchase, typically you would want to do, not 50,000, sorry, 5,000 as a purchase. Anything less than a 1% is probably going to be seen as light. Anything more than 1% is going to be seen as stronger. Now, why is it seen as stronger? This deposit, and you can see it's within 3 business days. It has to be after acceptance by wire transfer or something else. So you can put or, buyer to deliver check, right? But something like that. So on this part, we do not handle checks ourselves. This is very, very important in the process of transactions. If you get this accepted, we don't. The minute you take possession of a check, even if it's the check and you deliver it to escrow, even if he gives you the check at the front of the office and you walk it upstairs to First American, then it's a trust account issue. That means we have to log it in and then log it back out. We don't even have a trust account. There's too much liability with it. So you are not allowed to touch the buyer's money. And all brokers one way. The buyer has to either wire the money to the escrow or deliver the check to the escrow themselves. And you would escrow would be open. You would give them the information. Escrow will work with them to get the buyer deposit. This is the only, the initial deposit amount that is the only requirement on this contract that is by business days. Everything else is by calendar days. But note, the deposit is by business days. What does that mean? So if we got in contract on a Thursday, okay, so the contract's also timing on contract. Contract days, the day it's fully executed, the day that all parties sign the agreement is day 0 in the contract. So if I have 3 business days to do this, does it make sense? Then say they did a contract today. Today is Tuesday. Tuesday would be day 0. Wednesday would be day 1. Thursday would be day 2. Friday would be day 3. The initial deposit is due to escrow by Friday. Does that make sense? Now, if we got a contract tomorrow, Wednesday would be day 0, Thursday would be day 1, Friday would be day 2, but it's business days. Monday would be day 3 unless it's a holiday. So just note the deposit is the only one that is a business day requirement, not a calendar day requirement. Any questions on that? No? Okay. Increased deposit. Sometimes people want to increase deposit. This tends to only happen in very tight, aggressive markets where you'll often increase the deposit from 5,000 to something like your down payment size. So say they were doing a 10% down, 50,000, they may say, we're going to go to 5,000 to $30,000 once we release contingencies. That's just a way to show the buyer or the seller you're serious, more serious. You'll see that not so much in Sacramento, but you'll definitely see it at times in the Bay Area when it's aggressive, where there's very tight markets. You can see that as well. Why is the deposit important? I want to back you up a little bit on this. Why is the deposit important? Why is the amount of the deposit important? Does anyone know? What's there more experienced people out here? Who's in here more experienced? And you know? Why is the amount of deposit important? Wow. Quiet. Okay. The reason the amount of the deposit is important is that is the amount that is up for grabs if the buyer releases all contingencies and does not close escrow. So if the buyer releases all contingency and does not close escrow, then it becomes a negotiation between the buyer and seller on how the deposit is split. And escrow will not release the deposit to either party without approval from both parties. So at that point, it becomes hostage to an agreement. Does it make sense? So from the seller's perspective, the bigger the deposit, the more serious you think they are about closing. Does that make sense? Because they're willing to put that up as a risk in case they don't close. We clear? Good. All right. All right. And that's why increased deposits happen. Loan amount. This is the first loan. Now, here's the thing. The first loan is the loan amount. This is where math comes in a little bit hard for agents, so you have to do math. Like if you're doing an FHA loan, how much is the down payment?
3.5.
What?
3.5.
Thank you, Olga. 3.5% is the down payment for an FHA loan. So if we're doing 500,000 FHA loan, what would we put as a loan amount? Anyone know? Anyone can calculate it?
Chat is disabled.
Oh, chat is disabled. Oh, I'm sorry. Let me see. Let me see if I can change it. I think I fixed it. Let's see if you can do that. So, is it there? Test. Yeah, okay, cool. So thank you. Anyone come to amount?
17,500.
Okay, see, this is where agents make the mistake. This is the loan amount, not the down payment. It's 500. If we're doing a down payment, it is 3.5% is the down payment, but the loan amount is 96.5% of 500,000, which would be 482,500. Does that make sense? I see all the time. I see agents make this mistake. They're super green. I almost want that contract because I know I can like work them in the transaction because they don't know what they're doing, and I can make it totally in my favor because they don't know what they're doing. So if you make this mistake, it makes you look super green. Just FYI, and you're going to get victim. The other agent, if they're skilled and kind of they can victimize you. So just be careful on that. You'll know this because it'll put a percentage of the purchase price. So whatever it says, the remaining percentage to 100% should be the down payment amount. Does that make sense? So if I was doing 10% down, 50,000, in the conventional, it would be 450, and you see it's 10% down, it would be 90%, and then 10%. So your check is always a percentage that you're getting the loan amount right, because the remaining percentage should be the down payment percentage. Make sense? Of course, you won't know this unless you got the pre-approval letter and you're working with the lender, right? So it's important. Now, here's another thing. You're allowed to, if it's an adjustable rate loan, you want to check adjustable. Not to exceed, buyer can pay up to points to obtain the rate. So, okay, here's what we're doing. Not to exceed. Most agents don't fill this out. But if your buyer is super rate sensitive, you can put a rate in there. Now, if you don't put a rate in there, say, for example, on the loan contingency, if they were to, now everyone knows a loan contingency, if you cancel on the loan contingency, it's because your loan was not approved, correct? We understand if the loan's not approved, you can cancel on your loan contingency. But if you put a rate in there, and say the lender says, the buyer's like, I can only do this price and this payment, that's what I want to do, and I'm locking it at 6.75% because that's what I know, 6.25% because that's what I want, but I can't pay higher, you can put 6.25% in there. Now, here's the difference. On your loan contingency, instead of just cancellation because of non-approval, you can also cancel if the final loan rate comes in above 6.25. Even though the loan's approved, if the loan rate comes in above the rate and they can't buy it down, then you can also cancel on the rate itself. So, and I tend to leave it blank, but if the buyer is super cost or tight on their money, especially tight on the payment, like we're maxing out their approval, I usually try to put a rate in there just to protect my buyer. Does that make sense? It all defaults to a conventional loan. If there's FHA or VA loan, it's HVAC type. Seller financing is another. If you are checking seller financing, please consult your coach or broker. That is not a transaction you should be doing on your own. Seller finance means you are negotiating a loan through that transaction, and you will need broker help to do that. Pay up to points. You can put points that attain the rate. So if you're going to put a rate, sorry, let me back up a little. If you're going to put a rate of 6.25, you need to put points. That means how much additional will the buyer bring cash-wise? Because on a loan, the buyer can bring more cash at the purchase time to lower the rate, buy down the rate, right? So you have to put a cap on this. So you may say 0.5%. Oops, sorry. So I can say the buyer is not going to see 6.25%, and he can pay up to a 0.5 point to buy the rate down. But if it exceeds that metric, we can cancel even if the loan's approved. Leslie, you have a question.
Yeah, so this information we would be getting from our loan officer, right?
Yes, and actually this should be happening up front. So you should, after your buyer consult, you're signing a buyer broker agreement, they're getting pre-approved, the lender should tell you, yeah, they're doing an FHA loan, they're doing a VA loan, they're doing a conventional loan. This is the down payment we're targeting. This is the max they want to do, or this is the max they're approved for, but they only want to do this because they want payments like this. You should have that conversation with the lender and know when you're tight. You get some people like, I get buyers like this, like, John, they're approved, but they're only approved to 400, and they only have enough cash for the down payment. They don't have enough cash for the closing costs. I need, and even then, I need a little bit, I need a credit for the closing costs, and I need a rate buy down too of this much. So they may tell you, I need a credit from the seller to make the deal work. So if you're going to do that, you need to make sure you're tight and you understand that from your lender. And obviously, as you're going, rates vary so much right now. So if you are shopping for them for 3 months and you come back after 3 months and you're ready to write an offer again, I would check in with the lender again. What are the current rates? Where are we at? How is the buyer still on board with it? Do you need to check in with the buyer again, right? So I will say, if you check FHA or VA, it's going to upload this HVAC HID attached document to the offer that you want to provide. There is the reason for this. FHA and VA have you can write what we call a non-contingent offer, right? But VA and FHA, so you could really write a loan, an FHA offer saying no contingent. We release all contingencies. It does not matter. FHA and VA, they have a right of rescission built into law. So if you look at the FHA form, the HVAC form, it says that appraisal If that appraisal does not come back at value, or it requires repairs and the repairs are not approved by the seller, the buyer can cancel and get their deposit back, no questions asked. So if you're on the listing side, please be aware, you may get a non-contingent offer, but if they're HAVA, they do have an appraisal lender required repairs contingency, and they can cancel. Okay, I want you to understand that.
John,
Conventional, no, but
can I ask a
FHAVA,
question?
yes, yes, yeah.
Okay, so just to clarify, so if I was representing somebody, they're doing FHA, we've removed all contingencies. I can't imagine doing that for FHA, but we had essentially the FHA contract is saying we actually can get their deposit back for appraisal and loan.
For if check deliver for appraisal and lender required repairs.
Okay. Okay.
So-
So if I was
So even if
writing-
I did an
like-
FHA offer and it's super competitive, so I just released all contingencies, the house looks beautiful. Appraiser goes out there and says, "Ooh, there's flaky paint. You got to do the paint." Maybe it appraises the paint. Buyer's like, "This house is beautiful. Buy it as is." You released all
Okay.
contingencies. Legally, under law, it's called a right of rescission. You can actually rescind your offer and cancel it and get your deposit back according to law, even if the contract, the RPA says all contingency release, and you signed a form that released contingencies. It is an absolute right that is guaranteed in federal law, and state and contract law and state law can't override it.
So would you say you're canceling because of the loan, or you're canceling because of the appraisal, or because of inspections? Like what would
You
you say?
can't,
is the
you can't do inspections. It has to be off of appraisal and any lender required repairs.
Okay. Okay, got it. Thank
Does
you.
that make sense? So,
Yes.
but there is a right of rescission that is based in federal law for FHA and VA loans that cannot be undone in writing on state contracts, period. End story. So just if you're on the listing side, just note that. Even if you make a non-contingent offer, but it's a VA loan, they can rescind if they get a low appraisal and you have to get the deposit back, even if it's non-contingent. Okay. But obviously,
Thank you.
if you don't know that, I have had times where the listing agent doesn't know that. We're writing a very low contingent offer. Appraisal comes in low. They say, "We want the deposit." And I've gotten the deposit back for agents just off of that requirement, because even though they release contingencies, because it is law. So, all right. Additional financing amount. You should not be doing additional financing. There used to be a lot of this in the past, but when we did the Great Recession and reforms were made, this got away a lot of seconds. You'll see this more in commercial, but that you should not be doing another second unless it's a weird situation like down payment assistance or something like that. You can see is tier primary, check secondary investment. I will
John,
say,
sorry, I had one more question.
yes.
With this, because I thought I found myself in a situation where I was gonna have to write additional financing because it was an assumable loan. And so they were gonna essentially be getting a second loan for the amount that the first loan didn't cover, if I'm making sense. So,
Okay. Yeah. In that case, it's going to be it's going to be, like I said, a weird situation. So
okay, but I
say
did write
this
that
is
down
500 and the
because-
initial loan that you're assuming is 300,000, right? And I wouldn't
Yeah.
check via FHA. I would check, and I would just put the term, and I would just put, what do you call it? I just put, assuming loan, right? Or something like that, just so they know, right?
Okay,
And then I would put, if they're getting secondary financing, that's going to fall into second position behind that assumed financing.
mm-hmm.
Then I would put that amount there. I'm doing another 100,000 in assumed financing, right? Other, second loan, right? Or something like that.
Okay, okay, I was just making sure that I had set that up correctly. Thank you.
Does that make sense? So that would be a time you would put in a second loan, but it's unusual.
Okay.
So nowadays, please, primary versus secondary versus investment. We have had recently, and actually it's going to small claims court, and they're fighting over the deposit because the buyer, which we represented, said he was primary, but it turns out that he was really making it a rental. He canceled the deal after on contingency, and the seller's like, "You bad faith misrepresented." And I know there's pressure on you by investors to market primary or secondary as a way to get the rate down on the loan. Please resist that pressure. it is illegal. It is called mortgage fraud. And actually in your contract, this mortgage fraud on the lending side and on the real estate side, it is just fraud, or at worst, I mean, at best, bad faith in your negotiating, right? So any questions on those? Okay, buyer sign on the bottom. Now we're getting to the seller payment of closing costs. Now up here, this is where you do if the seller credit to the buyer. Now, just so you know, these days everyone's asking for credit. It is trending toward a buyer's market. So in a buyer's market, you can ask for credit, and we are seeing a lot of credit offers. So if you're writing offers with no credits, you're probably not doing your buyer a service, because we're seeing a lot of credit asks right now, and in large amounts. I've seen on average about $10,000 credit asks on most offers we're seeing through the brokerage, just because sellers are willing to pay the closing costs to get the deal done. Okay, you would type that amount here. Now, please note, additional seller credit terms. If there's any terms additional in there, sorry, I put 10,000, I mean 100,000. I was putting 10,000 in here. If there's any additional terms here, but please note, this credit does not cover your compensation. It is a credit to the buyer's closing costs. Understand? Not your compensation. The next level is your compensation, and you should always be checking this. Seller payment to compensate buyer broker, and this is going to say where you ask for the commission amount. You know, I want 2.5%. I want 3%. Now, this is negotiable in the contract. I have an iPhone user who is raising their hand. So can you?
Hey, John, it's Carol Ann Redfern. How are you?
Hey, Carolyn.
I have a question
Yes.
about the credit,
Okay.
the buyer's asking for a seller credit. Recently, I heard that instead of using those credits for closing costs, take that $10,000 credit and use it to buy down the interest rate. And that will save money in the long run. Have you heard that before?
Yeah. Okay.
Okay.
Does everyone understand loans and points? No? Okay.
No.
Okay. Obviously not. So let's talk about loans and points. So we talked about a little bit earlier here. So whenever your lender quotes you a rate, oh, is Joe on? Joe, you want to talk about rate? You want to talk about points? Is that you?
That was an accident, my bad.
Okay, no problem. I thought it was Joe, our lender, not the right person. So if Joe wanted to talk about it. Okay, so whenever a lender quotes and says, hey, your loan is pre-approved, FHA, 6.25%. Here's your payment. They say that to the buyer, go shop. What they are quoting you is likely what we call around par pricing, meaning 6.25%, meaning that's the rate we can quote you, and you don't have to pay money to get that rate, and we don't have to give you money at a higher rate. Now, it goes both ways. So 6.25% is usually what we call par pricing, and I could pay, the buyer can come in with additional money, usually we call points. It is the percentage of the loan amount. So in this case, we have a 500,000, well, I changed it, but say we're doing a 450 loan conventional. It's a 50,000 450 loan. A point would be 1% of the loan amount. That's what a point is considered. So it would be $4,500 in this case if you're doing points. Okay. So essentially, what a buyer would do is he says, you know, they may say, you know, hey lender, I like your loan. I like you. The payment amount at 6.25 is just too much for me. I really need it a little lower. And they may say, that's great. I could get you to 6%, but you got to pay a point. In this case, on this loan, you got to pay $4,500 at close, additional above closing costs to buy the rate down from 6.25 to 6. Does it make sense? That's points. Now, each lender and different program, how much rate drop you get for every point you do depends on the lender and the type of loan. So literally, if you're doing that, you have to ask, it's a pure lender question and the type of loan and who the lender is. They have their own buy down rate schedule. Does that make sense? Generally, above 1 to 2 points, it makes sense. After that, the cost to benefit ratio doesn't make sense. So the point. So Caroline, your question of does it make more sense? Yes. Usually, though, what the lenders will say is if we buy down the rate, it's going to cost you $4,500 and you get a lower payment. How much time do you have to make that lower payment before the savings you have from the higher payment add up to $4,500. Generally, they're going to want to see something less than 5 to 7 years on that return rate, because generally most people sell their homes in 7 to 10 years. So their lenders is going to say, yeah, if it's going to change if you're going to make money in less than 5 years by buying on the rate, they're probably going to recommend it. If you don't, if it's not going to see a benefit till year 9, they probably won't recommend it. Make sense? So it really depends on the lending situation, the rate buy down, and where you are. But it can help. So often this credit can be used for both. If the buyer is going to buy points, it will show up as a fee on the loan costs in the HUD, in the settlement statement. So it will be a closing cost. Does that make sense? So this 10,000, you could use 5,000 for, for expenses, and you can also use that. So, but just know when you're doing credit, remember what's the rule of thumb for about a cost of how much does it cost about a buyer on closing costs on average? Does anyone know? Rule of thumb. Okay. The rule of thumb, and it depends type of loan, but generally about 2.5% of the loan amount is going to be usually the closing cost that the buyer will have on this transaction. Does it make sense? So your lender will also be able to estimate that. But that's about the rule of thumb. Why did I do that? Oh, my thing's really wonky. Hold on. Okay, got it. So just note that that buyer credit can cover both points and closing costs. It's all the same. The points just show up as a closing cost. So, and yeah, your lender will work with them. They may say, hey, look, let's take 5,000 of that and buy down rates because that's going to give you benefit, and use the rest to find out how to close and do the rest. That's, they'll work on that ratio and they'll just do it with them. So now, having said that, you may need if you're talking with the lender, you may need closing costs to cover the seller closing costs, and you may need money for rate buy down as well. You may need both to make the loan for the buyer to happen. That is you and your lender talking. If you need both, you need to make sure you add them together and put that number in there. G1. Make sense? There are limits on how much you can ask for a credit. FHA VA is 6%. Most conventionals are 3 or 2%, sometimes less depending on the program. So there is a max amount you can actually ask or get for a credit. And if you ask for more credit than your loan allows, guess what? Your buyer loses it. There's some creative ways to deal with that, but make sure if you're asking for large credits and it exceeds the lender's max credit, seller credit allowance, then the buyer is going to lose that credit and the seller benefits anything above that limit. So you need to be careful. And we've had issues like that get very tense because the buyer had a big credit and he's losing thousands of dollars of it because he's hit his max on his loan. Make sense? Okay. Let's talk. Are we good with that? Points. Oh, one other thing with points, the lender can also help with closing costs. We talked about par pricing and buying points. The buyer can actually take a higher rate. The buyer he may say the lender, he needs money to close, he needs help to close. He may say, instead of 6.25, we're going to do a loan at 6.5. And if you go to 6.5, I can give you $4,500 credit to your loan cost, your credit closing costs. Does that make sense? So the buyer can also up the rate from the par pricing to gain credits from the lender to help with the closing costs on the product. So that is a way to be creative as well if you wanted to, assuming the buyer is okay with the higher payment, right? So questions, rates, par, points. We good? All right. Seller payment to broker. This number, this percentage has to match your buyer broker agreement. It can't be in excess of your buyer broker agreement. So if you have 2.5% of your buyer broker agreement and you put 3 and you get it agreed to, guess what? Your commission demand, we're going to look at it and we're going to change it to 2.5%. Unless you go get the buyer to agree to go to 3% on the buyer broker agreement. Make sense? So if you're asking for more commission than is on your buyer broker agreement, then I recommend at the time you write the offer, write an addendum or a modification of terms to the buyer broker agreement as well, changing the commission to that amount for this property. Does that make sense? So that way you can be authorized to do the higher commission. Any questions on that?
John, can you explain that again, please? I didn't quite understand what you meant, that you put more
So when you do
commission
your
on
buyer
here.
broker, yeah, when you do your buyer broker agreement with your clients, right, with your buyers, in that buyer broker agreement, it has to be 90 days, right? We know that, max 90 days. But one of the requirements is you have to list the amount of compensation. And say the buyer's like, and you tell the buyers like, hey, this is a compensation I will earn on this transaction if you work with me. It's 2.5%, say you did, and or say you do 3%, they're like, I don't know. And you're like, well, most of the time the seller will pay for it, but sometimes maybe they won't pay all of it, or they'll pay, they won't pay it at all. At that case, you will have to pay me this. Does it make sense? And they may say, I don't like that idea, or that's fine, but let's do 2.5%. But you get a seller that says, yeah, we'll do 3%, no big deal. And you put 3, but your buyer broker agreement says 2.5%. By law, you cannot earn more commission than is what is on your buyer broker agreement. So even if the seller agrees to pay you 3, the buyer broker agreement is going to cap it at 2.5. Does that make sense in that scenario?
Yeah, so you're saying,
So if you want to, this is where it's important. This is where professionalism comes in, right? You don't just do your buyer broker agreement and throw it in the corner and leave it alone. You know what your clients are and you know where you get them signed at. And so that way, say it's 3%, but I signed them at 2.5. I need to do a modification of terms. There's another form, modification of terms, to say, and I can say, hey, buyer, I know we signed 2.5. This seller is willing to pay me 3. I would like to collect all 3. To do this, I'm going to send you a MT along with the offer that says I'm changing our buyer broker agreement from 2.5 to 3% on this property only. And if you get in contract on this property, then I get 3% instead of 2.5. Does it make sense? So, but you have to do that. If you try to change it afterwards, that is non-compliant, meaning even if you go later at the close escrow, you realize, oh my gosh, I did this. We're still going to cap at 2.5, even if your buyer changes it, because they had to have agreed to it prior to going into contract. That is the rule. That is the law. Make
okay,
sense?
so this might be a different conversation for another day, but then how do you, are the buyers going to say, sure, I'm going to sign that, knowing that if for some reason the seller backs out of paying that, now they're on the hook for a higher rate? Or is that not a concern?
It's not a concern because all commissions are handled through escrow, third party. So escrow will take the seller proceeds and pay you.
Because it's going to be in writing from the seller at the time we ask the buyer to
No, literally
sign.
this section G3 18A, right?
Right.
This contract, they sign it or counteroffer and sign it. This is giving the escrow instructions to pay you this commission.
And so that comes into this form here, once it signs, will show the buyer the guarantee that the seller is going to be paying me and that they are not on the hook for the higher rate.
Correct.
Thank you. Okay, thank you.
Having said that, if your buyer broker means at 3% and you're only getting 2.5%, legally under the buyer broker agreement, your buyer would owe you 0.5%. So what you can do then is agree with another modification of terms to lower your compensation on your buyer broker agreement to 2.5% for this property. Make sense? So when we do our buyer broker agreements on my real estate team, we write in 3% and we justify it. And we said we will lower it if we get a lower amount of commission from the seller. Make sense?
And John,
And then we say also, if the seller goes way low on the commission, we will at that time notify you. We will tell you along with the offer they're proposing a really low commission that is below what we're willing to work for. At that point, we have a discussion about additional compensation, but that happens per offer. And they're like, okay, that's fine. Right? So question, Ashley.
If you're talking to your buyer and you're willing to go, the seller's only going to pay so much. And so you're saying, okay, I will take lower. That can be done after you're in contract, correct? There's no legal.
Yeah, you can agree to drop it later, but the legal terms actually adopted in that settlement agreement say the buyer compensation has to be set prior to going in contract. Does that make sense? So
Yes, but you can't legally up it after you're in
you
contract.
can't.
You can legally
Yeah,
lower.
it's not considered valid because you essentially you baited them into it, right? Essentially, you said you really want the house, you have to pay me this, right?
Yes.
So
Okay.
that is considered fraudulent at that point under the term. So if you're going to get a higher commission than your buyer broker agreement, you really need to get that in writing. And that's why I like to DocuSign it with the offer, because then you have documented proof it was signed at the time of offer, right? Does that make sense? It was signed before the offer was accepted. So,
Got it. Thank you.
okay. Whew. Any other questions on seller compensation to buyer's commission? I had agents who don't know this and don't fill it out. And we had an agent that didn't fill it out, and they ended up closing the deal and they got paid 0 commission because that's what they wrote.
But,
So
so if they don't, but why wouldn't their buyer's agreement so get them paid?
because their buyer agreement, if you know the buyer broker agreement, there's one provision in there that checks the box that says the buyer doesn't have enough cash to pay you a commission. You have to get it from the seller, and if you don't get it from a seller, then this agreement is void. Does that make sense?
Yes.
She checked that box. She knew
Okay.
they didn't have the money. And
Okay.
so essentially when they don't have the money, the seller didn't pay, she asked for a commission. Now the buyer broker agreement is void, right? Because they don't have the money and she forgot to ask for it. And she closed the deal with 0 compensation. And the listing agent and broker came back she complained and went to listing agent broker. We went to him. She's like, we accepted your offer because you said you don't want any seller payment to your compensation. So we assumed you were getting paid by the buyer. Right. And it's
Okay.
true.
Right.
It's
Right,
true.
right.
So FYI, protect yourself. So,
Okay.
okay, verification's all cash. If you're doing a cash offer, usually it's with attached to the offer. If you're doing an all cash offer and putting 3 days on here, that is very kind of frowned upon in the industry. Does that make sense? If you're doing a cash offer, you put a pair of verification of cash on there. What is verification of cash? Bank statements, brokerage fund statements, anything that looks thing. You can even, I've had pictures of their bank account from their app if they're willing to accept that. Proof of funds is not a defined term. Proof of funds is only what the seller is willing to accept as valid proof of funds. So if the seller says, I like your picture, we're okay with it, then it's proof of funds. Make sense? So, but if they say, that's not good enough, get me a statement, they can say that. So the seller can come back and say, or listening can come back and say, that is not adequate proof. Please provide documented proof. They can ask for more. Verification down closing costs, verification loan application. These two should be covered by your pre-approval letter. So if you're non-cash, you should have a pre-approval letter. On that pre-approval letter says should be approved to this amount, blah, blah, blah. But it also should say we have verified down payment and closing costs for the buyer. And that letter serves as your verification down payment and closing costs. If you want to be super happy, if you're doing a large deposit, honestly, if you're doing a large deposit and a lot of cash up front or a large down payment, I would recommend that you actually do provide, even if you have a loan approval letter, I do recommend you do provide a bank statement or proof of funds to show that you have the money, the buyer has the money for the large down payment. Cool. We good? Okay, we're done with all the seller covered expenses and costs. Buyer covered expenses and costs. We good? Okay. All right. We're going to now other stuff. So I want to note one thing. If you notice this, there's G3. These are the paragraph numbers. After this document, and I'll show you a little bit later, but I'm not going to go through it in detail. This paragraph here, the 18A, if you scroll down, you can go to paragraph 18A, and there's legal language explaining the seller compensation to the buyer's broker. Does it make sense? So the paragraph explaining all this information, you want more information. If you say, I don't remember what John said about this, you can literally go to 18A, and I can go all the way down here and go 18. Where's 18? Man, it's way down here. 18A, and see it talks about broker compensation. Make sense? And it tells us all the details. So before you blow up your coach because you forgot what this means on the contract, I recommend you go read the paragraph of the RPA.
please read
And-
the RPA.
Yes. And your coaches, and I can tell you the experience Stephen T. Webb's on here, all this, when I first started, I was told read the RPA. And I can tell you, when I read the RPA, I'm like, oh, I asked some questions. I understood it. I started backwards and forwards. I was schooling experienced agents on it, right? If you want to be a good real estate professional agent, you understand the contract, read the, trust me, it'll make a whole bunch of sense if you read it. And trust me, your coach and me, if you come to me with questions, I can tell if you haven't read it by the questions you ask.
Yep.
So I will know. So let's talk a little bit about this pre-qualification, pre-approval, fully underwritten pre-approval. I just want to talk about the differences of that. Pre-qualification is booty. Pre-qualification is, yeah, I'm a loan officer. I talked to a potential buyer. I talked to Jose about buying, and he told me he makes this much money and he says this much cash, and he said his credit's here, but I haven't verified any of it. But he told me that, and based on what he told me, I'm good. That is pre-qualification. As a listing agent, you do not accept pre-qualifications. Pre-approval is different. Pre-approval says, I have gotten the information from the buyer. I have verified income. I have verified assets. I have pulled credit, and I have run it through what we call a DU system, a desktop underwriter system. Lenders have a system called DU or AU sometimes for Fannie and Freddie. They have these systems, and they put it in there. And that, if you put all that information in there, assets, income, credit, and all that, it'll tell you loan approved or not approved or pre-approved. That is pre-approval. They've done that. They've gotten DU approval that says, yeah, this loan will be approved. If these all are right, this loan will be approved. Right? Does that make sense? So that is a good level to be in. That's where most will be on it. You can do fully underwritten approval. So some lenders, not all lenders, will allow you to do what we call TBD approvals, to be determined. And what that means is literally you apply for a loan, you give them all the docs, the loan officer packages it, gives it to the underwriter like you're an escrow, and runs the financials on that, everything, except the property and appraisal. They don't do that, obviously, because you don't have a property appraisal. They just do the loans, and they come out on the backside and says, you're fully underwritten approved. That means we went to the underwriter, there's no, we are sure you're approved. All you need is now the appraisal. Now, why would I go different? Why would I ask this? So just note TBDs take a while because they get low priority because they're not in contract. So some lenders won't do TBDs, so just note some will, but usually they take 1, 2, 3 weeks because they're low on the totem pole because they don't have a contract tied to it yet. But here's the power of a fully underwritten approval, and I like these as a listing agent because one, they can generally close quicker. Their loan is approved. It doesn't have to go to underwriting. That means all I have to do is get the appraisal done and reviewed by the lender, and I can go to closing docs. So typically someone who is even with a loan, it could be FHA or even VA loan, and they're fully underwritten approved, I can probably close in 17 days. Make sense? Maybe even so, maybe even faster because the lender can go fast because they already did the underwriting on it. So if I have a buyer, there's two levels. So when do I go to fully underwritten approval? If I have a buyer that is a low pre-approval amount, that means I know it's going to be hard for this buyer to get accepted in this market because they're at a low price point and we're going to be fighting all the time. If I know that, I'm likely to ask him to get fully underwritten approved because that will let me write more sexier offers. So maybe I can compensate not as much money as they want, but maybe I can compensate on timing as fast as the seller wants, and that can win in an offer. It's a situation. So when do I do fully underwritten approval? It's when those situations occur. Secondly, also, if the buyer's income is weird, the buyer has 3 jobs, the buyer's one is commission based, or they have a business and they get paid through their business and they write their taxes real low and they hide income and yada, yada, yada. If they have those situations where the income's really weird and hard to document, I usually make them go fully underwritten approval so that we know we have a verifiable loan that the income is approved at, right? So just note those 2 issues with the lender. If you have a good loan officer, they're probably going to recommend that anyways, but please work with your loan officer on that. Any questions about pre-qualification, pre-approval, and fully underwritten approval? Ooh, we're touching a lot here. It's going to speed up a little bit here. Final verification condition. The final verification of condition. 5 days prior to close of escrow, the seller must provide access to reasonably provide access to your buyer and you to do a final walkthrough. We call it sometimes, as a layman's term for real estate, it's called a final walkthrough, but it's really a final verification of condition. Typically it's 5 days before close of escrow. What do you do on a final verification condition? Anyone know? What are the two things you're responsible for doing on the final verification of condition? 5 days before close. Anyone know? Man, this group is tough. All right, two things. One is on the final verification of condition. If you had a request for repairs on that contract and the seller had agreed to do repairs to the home prior to close of escrow, that should be documented and verified at the final walkthrough. Make sense? So if you have an RRR and you do it, if you don't feel competent on verifying repairs were done, you don't feel skilled enough to do it, home inspectors and other inspectors will come out again to verify things are fixed, but you're going to have to pay additional fee to do it. It's not a full inspection fee. It'll be a much reduced cost, but you can also have that if you do it. So sometimes I have them come out if the seller says, yeah, I'll do all the repairs, but I'm going to do them myself. And you know that I don't trust the seller, I might have the home inspector come back out and verify the quality of the repairs so that we have something documentable to say, hey, I know you did this, but it's not to code, and yada, yada, yada. So,
John,
Yes.
John, Carol Ann again. So I've had this happen where I've done the final walkthrough and it's 2 or 3 days before and things have not been completed, maybe started. But then they say, oh, it'll be done in time. Don't worry, go ahead and sign. I'm always hesitant about that because they could walk away and then we're stuck. What do you?
Okay. The final great question. The final verification condition is not a contingency, meaning it's not the way a buyer can back out if the seller didn't do all the repairs or that he said he would, or he or she would, or maybe didn't do the quality the buyer wanted. There's some dispute about the final condition of the property. Your only leverage of the buyer at that point is to withhold closing. So remember, escrow has a fiduciary duty to the buyer and the seller. If the buyer or the buyer's agent gives instructions to escrow to say, we're having an issue with the final verification of condition of the property, please do not release to record this escrow until I give approval. We get buyer approval to do that. Escrow is required to hold off closing. Now, that creates pressure because maybe you go past close of escrow date and they send it. It can create this back and forth pressure where people tit for tat things. If that's happening, get your broker, get myself involved, and I'll talk to the other broker. We can usually work it out. But your only way of leverage on the buy side for a final verification condition is refusing to release to record.
Can that refusal to release to record ever have an impact on rates?
Yes.
On somebody, it can. So it can be a real sticky problem. Okay.
It can be super sticky. That's why I said at that point, if you're in a dispute, you should really get your broker involved. Does that make sense?
Okay.
Because we can work through these issues. Having said that, remember I talked about loans and loans approval and rates. Remember the buyer says, I can do 6.5. So when your buyer gets in contract, the lender actually submits your loan and they lock in a rate. Literally, they pay to lock that loan in for a time period at that rate. Typically, they'll do a 30-day lock. Sometimes they'll do a 45-day lock. It just depends on the lender. And it actually costs the lender money to lock it. So just FYI. So your lender's putting up some money to lock it. If you go in this dispute and it goes beyond the lock date, it opens up it back to the market. Does that make sense? Like you're no longer locked in at 6.25. If that lock expires, you're going to go whatever the current market is, that's the new rate. Now, sometimes I've had it at advantage where it goes to there and the rates are lower. And so, yeah, let it expire. We want a lower rate, right? But sometimes the rates are higher and you want to keep that lock. You can extend locks, but they cost money. And generally the lender is going to ask the buyer to front that money for a lock rate extension while you're working out these disputes. So I'm going to give you another broker warning. It is much easier to resolve disputes at the beginning of the dispute than after you guys are already yelling and cussing at each other. Does that make sense? So if you're getting a dispute please let us know ahead of time. Please let your coach know or whoever's in charge. We can work these out generally easier on the front end. Okay. The second thing you verify, we talk about verifying repairs at close of escrow. The second thing you can verify, you're supposed to verify close of escrow, that the condition of the home is at the same condition at the time of offer. So final verification, you have two things: that repairs were completed that the seller would say they did, and that the final condition of the property is the same as when you made the offer. Not when you showed it, but when you made the offer. So we have situations, especially where there's rent backs, where a seller is still in the house at close, they move out, and suddenly there's holes in the wall. And there's a big old stain on the carpet, but that was under the rug. Does that make sense? So final verification of condition is important for those things. If I'm doing a final walkthrough and the seller has yet to move out, I try to delay the walkthrough prior till after the seller has moved out, which you have the right to ask for.
John,
Oh.
I was gonna make a comment about that, because so what you just said answered my comment. I actually had a house, we did the walkthrough, it was fine. They still had a couple of items in the house, and guess what one of the items was a picture on the
Mhm.
wall. And when we
Alright.
took the picture off, and they moved, we did the walkthrough, we signed off, we went back in, moved in, took the picture was now gone, and there was a giant hole in the wall. The picture was
Okay.
covering a hole.
Cover the hole. Okay, exactly. That's perfect example. Perfect example. Okay. So that's why, and this is week 4 class. Week 4, we're going to talk about SIPs, which is seller in possession, which is the seller stays in home after close, and RLAS is rental lease agreements, essentially. So and these issues come up a lot because you can do your final walkthrough, but the seller's still living in the house, so you can't see everything. So you're going to do another final walkthrough at the end. This is why I always recommend that in your SIPs or RLAS that you put a deposit in there. Because remember, when you do a SIP or RLS, you are being the buyer becomes a landlord and the seller becomes a tenant. Make sense? In those situations. If you have a deposit, you can say, tenant, you messed up the house. You left a hole in the home. I'm going to keep part of the deposit to fix it. Make sense? Obviously, that's a negotiation. But if you're going to have a final walkthrough and the seller's going to stay in the house, and we're doing a SIP RLS, I always ask for a deposit to be held within escrow. So escrow will hold the deposit till it's off, and then both parties agree to have escrow release the deposit as they instruct. So, whew. Questions on final verification of condition. Clear as mud? Good? All right. Assignment request. This is not often. You'll see this more with investors, especially wholesalers. Assignment request. This contract defaults to allow a buyer to assign the contract to anyone they want for 17 days. So you'll see those wholesale offers that really like this, or they'll put sometimes here, John Barnato or assignee. They'll write that in there a lot. You're likely getting a wholesale offer. What does that mean? You're getting an offer from an investor that's trying to lock up your property in contract and then take your contract because it's a good deal and sell it to another investor for a profit, and they actually close on it at a higher price and they make the difference. Make sense? So be careful on your listings when you get those kind of offers, but that's an assignment request. Sometimes I have to do an assignment request because we're buying as individual buyers, but I recommend the buyers get a trust. And sometimes they're like, yeah, we'll get that done. And sometimes they want to put it in the trust prior to close. So you can essentially, you're taking the individuals and assigning it to their trust account, which you could do in the first 17 days, to their trust entity, I should say, not account. Okay, we good with those? Good, okay. Contingencies. What contingencies? Can someone tell me the definition of contingencies? Wow, this is a very excitable group. Okay. Contingencies are rights of the buyer to cancel the contract mid-escrow and have their deposit returned for some deficiency. Okay. I want you to note, because we always talk about, oh, there's 3 contingencies: loan, appraisal, and inspection. It's more complicated than that. There is loan approval. If you check no loan contingency, if you check that, that means you're removing loan contingency from the contract. We check no appraisal. So this is where the FHA VA comes in here. And it even says that removal of appraisal contingency does not eliminate the appraisal cancellation rights in HVAC. So this is where I told you, it even says it here. FHA and VA offers have an appraisal contingency, even if you check the box and say there's none. Make sense? So, okay.
John, did you said something about that earlier, and I wanted to confirm what you said about that. So you said even if the seller or the buyer doesn't know, the buyer's agent doesn't know that there's a law there, and they've released contingencies, you as the seller, because we do know the law is there, and we have to. Do we, as the selling agent, legally have to return the deposit if the buyer does not ask for it? Under the conditions of FHA and the appraisal.
Under this?
Yes.
No. Remember, you don't owe a duty to the other side. You owe a duty of care. You don't owe a duty of information, right?
Okay.
Does that make sense? So like, if they say like, oh, we're canceling and we'll split the deposit, and it's an FHA loan and they want to do it, that's up to them, right? Does that make sense?
Okay.
So, but if they came to you and said, we're canceling because the appraisal came in low and this is a FHA loan and we have right of cancellation based on the FHA loan, then you're like, yeah, release the deposit, even if they released appraisal. Yeah.
But
so.
So I just want to make sure I understand. So if they've released all contingencies and then the house does not appraise and they say, oh, we can't buy the house that didn't appraise, but they don't ask for the deposit back, we are under no legal obligation as the seller's agent to give them the money back.
Correct. It is the buyer's agent responsibility to inform their buyers on that.
Now, see, personally,
So
would feel.
we talked about now. You could be ethical if you want. I
Yeah,
mean, it depends how
right.
ethical. There's no legal requirement for that, but I would say you could argue there's an ethical duty for your fellow agent on that, right? So,
Yeah.
and I try to be
plus-
ethical if I can. Like if they do it, I'll go to my seller and be like, look, it's FHA loan. I already talked to. And honestly, if I was presenting this offer and there's a FHA, I talk about the contingency. I talk about, look, they're waiving it, but it doesn't matter. Right?
Yeah.
And I would talk, so the seller would know prior to even signing the offer, because I would explain that to them, obviously, right? They're like, why does it say that? So I'd explain it. So it's really, I don't really get in those issues because I inform both the seller and obviously I'd inform the buyer as well. But I know a lot of buyer's agents don't know that. But I want to arm you on the buy side. If you're a buyer's agent, please note that.
Well,
And I have gotten offers accepted that are FHA VA, because this is super aggressive markets where you had to be aggressive. And I had no loan and appraisal contingency, and the appraisal came in low, and we canceled and got the deposit back off of that, even though I waived it, right? And this listing agent was going crazy on me, and I said, talk to your broker, and she came back, yeah, we're releasing deposit, right? So,
Well, personally, as an agent, even as a seller's agent, I would want to, hey, buyer's agent, let's do this. And because you could run across that buyer's agent another time in another deal. And I would just always want to be ethical and right. So, okay.
I've been 17. Yeah, thank you. I've been 17 years in this business, and I can tell you the only thing you can really control is your reputation and professionalism.
Yeah.
Period.
Okay.
That's the only thing you control.
Like
So
I said, I just want to make
you
sure.
decide, and the real estate market is the agents that actually do a lot of business is a very small group. So, and you will develop a reputation very, very quickly.
Good or
in that
bad.
group. Good or bad. Good or bad. You'll develop a reputation. Trust me. So, okay. Loan appraisal. This is typically 17 days. If you want to shorten these, please don't just shorten them because you want to be sexy. Please talk to your loan officer. Your lender has to be able to get it done. Basically, you're promising things that your lender has to perform on without talking to your lender. That is like a poor, that's called poor professional standards. Does that make sense? So if the lender is expecting 17 days on appraisal and loan, if they want to do shorter, they will tell you, or you can ask them. But if you're gonna block them on that, if you're gonna dictate things on them, you need to have that discussion. So, okay. There is investigation of the property. This is generic investigation. So we talk about inspection contingencies. The inspection contingency is actually a group of contingencies, and they're all separate contingencies, actually, in the contract. There is one for investigation of the property. This is what you actually are doing. These are the home inspections, the roof inspections, the pest inspections. That's investigation of the property. Typically, you have 17 days, although you can go quicker in these markets. Now, this is different. There's also in the contract informational access to the property. Buyer's right to ask the property for information is not a contingency. So this is not a contingency. You may write this as 10 days. Oh, sorry. You may write this as 10 days for inspection, but leave this at 17. I've had this dispute happen. Our listings are like, they can't enter the property anymore. They already signed off on their contingencies. And I said, no, what day are you in? We're day 15, but they signed off on day 10. The buyer still has the right to access the property up to 17 days, just not for contingency reasons. They can access for like, I want to be able to measure if my couch will fit. I want to be able to if my TV will fit. I want to look at the carpet to see if I want to replace carpet. They can do those things, informational access to the property, but they can't do, it's not a cancellation. It's not a contingency. Does that make sense? So there's a difference between timeline for investigation and timeline for the buyer to access the property. So under the contract, say you did a 30-day contract, they would have 17 days to access the property. At that point, the seller could refuse access to the property up to 5 days close of escrow for the final walkthrough. Make sense? We good? All right. There is also a contingency under the investigation that is known as insurance contingency. And this is becoming very important in California because insurance is way whacked up right now. You want to say real estate's hard, insurance is screwed right now because whether you like it or not, there is climate change happening. And I don't know about you, but in Sacramento, there's a month or two where we just have fire season where it's just smoky all over the place and it's fires all over the place, right? You know this. I mean, if you're living here, you know this, right? So fire maps are changing dramatically. The state is changing all the fire maps to make these high fire zones. If you're in a high fire zone in California, your insurance is ungodly expensive. Literally, one of our agents did a property that was literally in a state national park forest cabin, bought the property, and the fire insurance, the home insurance on the property, and it was only a $190,000 cabin, like super cheap out in the woods, super small. The insurance payment was just as much as a mortgage payment. So insurance is a contingency that your buyer can get the insurance. And you have to be careful. There are a lot of insurers that will not touch certain insurance policies. Like I would recommend, don't go with a direct insurer. I would go with a broker, someone that can shop your insurance, because right now you need to shop to get stuff done because there's some that just restrict, they won't do certain things, right? So Stephen T, you have a question?
Oh, no, I don't. Sorry.
Oh, I'm usually just making some noise with it. Okay. Review of seller documents. So I get this question asked all the time. Does the buyer have a deadline to review the documents that the seller disclosure we send them and return them signed? Yes, they do. This is called review of seller documents. Okay. Now, here's a track, and I see this all the time, and I have to clean it up all the time. Say you're doing 10 days for inspections, and you put review documents and you leave it blank at 17 days. I'm going to come back and put 10. Because essentially what you're saying is, I'll do inspections with 10 days, but John, literally, say you did inspections, we negotiate repairs, you release the investigation of property inspection, literally on day 17, you can come back to me and say, John, we don't like what you wrote in the TDS, we want to cancel, and you have the right to cancel and get your deposit back. Does that make sense? These are individual contingency releases, and we'll talk more detailed contingency releases in week 4 of the series, but just know these are individual. So usually if you're on the sell side, I am lining these up all to end at the same time period. Okay?
Yes.
If you shorten it. Okay.
John, are you saying you as in the seller's agent are aligning it?
I would. And if an agent isn't doing that, say they wrote 10 on investigation but left these all 17, I'm writing a fat counteroffer fixing all this. Right?
Okay, that's what
I'm saying L4 is 10 days, L5 is 10 days, L6 is 10 days, L7 is 10 days, right? I'm writing it in there because essentially they're saying, I'll release my investigation contingency, but I want these other contingencies that go longer, is what you're saying. That make sense? So, preliminary title report. Now this is delivery or 5 days after delivery, whichever is later. So please note, review of seller disclosures is 17 days or 5 days after delivery, whichever is later. So if they deliver late, you can do that. But just so you know, if you deliver the seller disclosure really late, they're given 5 days after delivery. And the reason this is, and I'm going to tell you this right now. Even if I wrote here, no contingency, it's going to add a contingency route to the program. But if I said no, and I say we're buying it as is and waive it. Okay. There is a right in California law, not federal law. Now we're talking California law. It's called a right of rescission. And it's based on the TDS and information related to the TDS. So the transfer disclosure statement, which is called the seller disclosure, when they give that to you, it does not matter if you have released all your contingencies. You have a 5-day right of rescission if you don't like what's on the TDS, even if you upfront release contingencies. In California, it's called a right of rescission. So that's why it says 5 days after, whichever's later. That make sense? This is important. I had an agent who came to me later. His buyer, they're about to close. They're a few days from closing. Literally, loan's about to fund. They're about to sign and fund and close. Buyer release contingencies. We're all good to go. Buyer's employer says, "Hey, we're having troubles. We're downsizing. We're going to lay off 50% of the staff. We don't know who, but we're going to lay off 50% of the staff." And he's like freaking out. I don't want a home that I'm going to lose my job and can't pay for. He's trying to back out of the deal. Seller has already moved out of the house. I told, and these are common, there's other comments. I told the buyer, "Is there any way to back out?" I'm like, "No, did you release this?" "No, you don't have no way. You may lose the deposit if you back out now." "Did they give you any disclosures recently? They were late." And he's like, "Yeah, actually, it took a while for the HOA docs to came, the common interest disclosures. They came yesterday." I go, "Congratulations. Common interest disclosures are tied to the TDS. You have a 5-day right of rescission under the TDS to cancel this deal under state law." We canceled. We got the deposit back. The seller had already moved out. The listing agent didn't know that. I got the deposit back under the right of rescission to the buyer. We canceled the deal. And because they were late with their HOA disclosures. And because of that, I got it back. You know, that listing agent got fired and relisted with another agent. And they're paying 2 mortgages because they already have vacated the property and purchased another one.
That seems a little deceitful.
It is deceitful, but you got to know your contracts.
Right.
So this is why I tell you, because I've seen this and I've used it before many times at Brokerland. Listing agents that are lazy with their disclosures.
Mm-hmm.
If you get those disclosures late, and the TDS is one form, but the TDS also states it covers common interest disclosures, HOA disclosures. It covers all leased and liened items, disclosure and contracts of leased and liened items, and it covers information in the NHD, information in the prelim, and it covers also what's in your listing agent avid, even visual inspection disclosure. So if you give your listing, if you're a listing agent and you give the wholesale disclosure up front and you give the listing and you get the avid later in the transaction, guess what? If they've all released contingency already, you have given that buyer a 5-day right of rescission right then.
Wow.
Stephen T, you okay with that? Because I know you're late on your avids now.
Thanks a lot. Thanks a lot. Make sure I'm not from now on.
Because if you get a good agent on the other side and they need to cancel, they are in the right and you are wrong, right? And this is separate from contingencies. This is right of rescission. So think about there's things out there. There's 3 levels here. There's the FHA VA appraisal contingency that is absolute by federal law. There is a 5-day right of rescission on anything required disclosing off the TDS, which the TDS requires to be disclosed. And there's and then there's contingencies below that. So just FYI. Beware. Beware. And if you're new, please be careful on these things. This is why your coaches harp on you on writing contracts right and being on time with your deadlines. Professional agents know their deadlines. Professional agents get the seller disclosures on time. Now, how do you get rid of the 5-day rescission? Does anyone know? What if you're a listing agent and you get a non-contingent offer? But you know, the minute you give them the seller disclosures, they get a 5-day right of rescission. You're like, damn it, it's not really a conditional, they can cancel still, right? So the one way you can avoid that right of rescission is the buyer signs the seller disclosures and TDS prior to the contract.
Can you say that again, please? You cut out real quick.
The buyers sign the seller disclosures, TDS, SPQ, HOD docs, all that stuff prior to the contract. So in my world, in my business, when I take a listing on and we go live, by the time I go live, we have all the seller disclosures. I pre-opened escrow, I got all the reports, I have my AVID completed, we have the TDS and SPQ completed, we have everything completed. We even have HOA docs. If we're going listing and there's HOA, I make the seller order them right up front. So we have those. Because when I go, if I get a non-contingent offer, then the first thing I do is I counter that offer and says, here's all the seller disclosures. Buyer agrees to review and sign disclosures as part of this offer. Review and approve and sign these offers as part of the offer. If you do that and include the signature of all those disclosures at the time of offer, there is no 5-day right of rescission.
So
Clear?
you're saying that, so when you're the listing agent, you get an offer, you're gonna send a counter with all of the documents in it saying, sign this?
Mhm.
Okay.
Because I know it's not really a non-contingent offer because they can have a right of rescission. But I can short circuit that by giving them the disclosures up front. But most agents are lazy. They don't get all the disclosures up front. They're not ready on their listing, and so they can't do that. Does it make sense? And they are stuck with a 5-day right of rescission, even on a non-contingent offer. Right? So, and I've done that with investors, and we've gotten the disclosure back. They're not happy about it. But okay. Review seller. We got the preliminary common disclosures. These are HOA docs. You'll see the HOA, the seller is required to pay for most of it by state law, the HOA docs. So I often get these up top. Leased or liened items. What are common leased or liened items that you see on houses?
Security systems, solar.
Security systems, solar, propane tanks sometimes, right? They're on propane. So just FYI, you need to have those docs. Part of the seller disclosures is giving them the contracts of those docs and telling them how to assume those leases. Make sense? So when I ask a seller, hey, about the list of property, do you have any leased or liened items? They say, well, no, I don't think so. And I say, propane tanks, solar, security systems. When was your security system installed, right? Usually it's typically about 2-year timeline on those. So beyond 2 years, you'll be okay. If the buyer needs to sell another property to buy it, typically they do car form COP. That brings in the COP form. That's a whole nother contingency. That's another class. Time of possession. Right now, the buyers, according to this contract, take possession upon recording. If you want a different time, that's there. Typically, the county in Sacramento and other locations, Sacramento has 2 recording times, one around noon, one at the end of the day. A lot of the other smaller counties have only 1 recording time, so just note that. Seller occupied or vacant units. This is okay. This is where you put if the seller is going to stay in the property after close of escrow. If it's less than 29 days, you must use form SIP. If it's more than 29 days, you must form RALS. There are legal ramifications on this. This comes from once you get beyond 30 days, it becomes a hard and fast tenant-landlord relationship, and it's governed by tenant-landlord law at that point. So a lot of this is very sticky, and there's been a lot of disputes around this. So we're going to talk about it in week 4, but this is where you would offer as a buyer. The seller says, oftentimes you're talking listing agents like, we did a 2-week rent back to get the seller out. You put it in there. Just note that you want to try to, as best as possible, keep the seller rent back less than 29 days. Okay, that just helps you legally. It's a lot easier. Literally, the difference is 29 to 30 days is if the seller doesn't move out in less than 29 days and I have a SIP in place, I can call the cops and we can have them say you're trespassing. If it goes to 30 days, I have to get an eviction.
So,
Literally.
John, so they can stay for 29 days after they get the keys for the new owners?
No, only if it's negotiated.
Okay.
Only if it's negotiated. And if you were negotiating here, and oftentimes it's when the seller's doing a contingent offer. They need to sell this house, take the money, and go buy another house. Does that make sense? They need time to sell this house, go through escrow, close it, get the money, put the money in the new escrow and close that deal, and then move. Does that make sense? So often they'll ask for rent backs. Tenant
So-
occupied. Go ahead.
If they don't find the house, it doesn't matter. They have to move on the 29th.
Correct.
Okay.
If they close, yes. If they close the deal, they have to move. And that's usually where it is. They thought they had a house, they canceled, they can't move out now, they don't want to be homeless, they're not going to do this thing, and it gets into a dispute, right? So occupied units by tenants, if there's tenants in the property, even if the tenants are going to move out prior to close of escrow, you must have a TOPA form. That's right there.
John,
Yes.
just based on that last agent's question, I had a property where I was a listing agent, and gratefully I put in there that the sale of that property was contingent of identifying and closing on another property before we would,
Correct.
and because
So, okay. So there is another form. I haven't thrown it in there, but there is another form. As a listing agent, if your buyer needs if your seller needs a contingency to find another property, right? There is a form that you as a listing agent need to get countered and incorporated into the offer that puts seller contingencies in place in case they don't find a property. Make sense? Those contingencies say, if I don't find a property and I don't close on a property, the seller can cancel the deal unilaterally, and they have to return the deposit. Make sense?
and
So-
that saved my client. That absolutely saved my
Yeah,
client.
a seller replacement property. I have to get it to. I can get it to you guys. I'll put it out there. But this is where you need to be savvy as a listing agent too, right? Like if your seller wants to accept the offer, you want to accept the offer because you need it pending to make sure you can write good offers on the other side, but you don't know if you're going to find a property. You need to get seller contingencies in place that allow the seller to cancel if they don't buy and get in contract and close. Otherwise, your seller's screwed. Could be homeless. Literally, you could make your seller homeless in those situations, which is not good. Not good. Trust me. Those result in lawsuits. Okay. Time of performance. Seller deducts according to the doc contract. You want seller delivery of documents within 7 days. That means the seller provides seller disclosures. You have 17 days you have till day 17 to return on the standard of the contract. I try to always make this day one. I try to give, even if they're doing investigations, I definitely try to give all my seller disclosures day one. Because I know, say they wrote 10 days. If I give it day one, they have no right of rescission after day 10, right? As expired after day 5 already, right? So sign a return escrow holder documents as standard, time to pay HOA fee ordering doc, time to pay fees for ordering HOA documents. I traditionally have my seller already over order docs up front because they're required to pay. Smoke and alarms, water heater bracing. This is saying that what are the three close escrow requirements, retrofit requirements? Anyone know? 3 of them. What are they? They're right there. Smoke alarms, CO detector, and water heater bracing. You should know these. Smoke alarms, they're grandfathered in if they're working, but typically the current code is 1 in each room and 1 outside any bedrooms. So if there's 4 rooms up top and they're all along the hall, there'd be 1 in each bedroom, 1 in the hall outside those bedrooms. And there's a bedroom downstairs, it'd be 1 in that bedroom downstairs and 1 outside that bedroom door downstairs. That would be the standard now. Old ones are grandfathered in, just note that's a code. CO detector is 1 per floor. Water heat bracing is double brace. Depending on where the water heat is located, the bracing is different. So you would consult your inspector on those. This is just saying that that the seller will have those up to code within 7 days after acceptance. Okay. Included items. We have 30 minutes here, so we're gonna go. Included items. Please be careful about this. You should put items that are currently in the property that are not considered transferable, not considered attached to the property. which includes stoves, refrigerators, washer, dryers, some dishwashers, some microwaves. They could be considered non-attached. So be careful on this. I've had disputes on video equipment. If there's cameras on there, please be clear when you're writing the offer as a buyer. If your buyer wants the cameras, trust me, I had this thing where they had a security system that he put up and all these cameras and he took them and it was a big old fight, right? So make sure you're writing things. So this is where you're smart as an agent. You're looking at the pictures, remembering the things. You're looking at all the things the buyer wants. When the buyer sees the property, they want those things. You need to make sure you put in there. I've had people remove electric car chargers out of the house when they were trying to get them chased. So those things are important. Same thing on the listing side. If you get this and there's things that are checked that are not in the house or your buyer does not want to transfer, you need to counter those out. Whew. Natural hazard disclosure report. Typically, the seller pays for these. These are the allocation of closing costs. These are typically what's negotiated. These are not all the closing, but you can hear slap provider. They're all here. I recommend you put Cap City NHD. This is actually our own company's Cap City NHD. This income helps the overall bottom line of the brokerage, which helps profit share. And we profit shared $5,000 last month to our agents. So I recommend you put Cap City NHD. That is our current Cap City. But of course, you can change any of these. But if you put Cap City NHD, that will benefit the office and that will all help us provide more service to you and profit share to you. So I recommend you do that. Optional wire file disclosure report. You can add more disclosures if you're in a high or very high rated fire zone, and those are changing actually, so here soon. But you can provide those if you want to. Those are tied to the NHD, and those provide more details about, just so you know, when you're doing fire zones, there is a requirement that this certain entities, either local entities, cities, counties, fire districts, or the state, CAL FIRE, are supposed to do annual inspections on the defensible space on this. It is supposed to be required. It is not enforced well. So a lot of sellers don't do it. And by the time you sell that, you have to negotiate a lot of it. That will come up in there. So smoke alarm duct detectors. If the smoke alarm CO water detectors are not braced properly, who pays for those? Typically that seller. Government required point of sale inspection reports, government required point of sale. This is for if a jurisdiction has its own requirement, what we call retrofit requirements. We know the state has water heater, smoke detector, CO detector, retrofit requirements. There are some local jurisdictions that have point of sale requirements as well. Can people name some out there? Who knows some? Anyone? Come on. I know some of these are experienced out there. In the city of Davis, before a sale can happen, a seller must have a permit inspection of their home, physical inspection by an inspector of the city of Davis, and they will go and inspect anything that was not permitted or approved to be in the house, and they will develop a report and ask you to either permit it or remove it. That is a government required inspection that is in the city of Davis. In the city of Woodland, you're required to the fire department is required to investigate all fire sprinkler systems in homes or buildings prior to close of escrow. So that is another inspection in the government board section in the city of Woodland. In Placer County, if there is a black kettle wood burning stove in the house, it is required to be inspected. And that's a local. So if you're not in one of these local jurisdiction areas, you should be countering this out. If you are, though, you need to be, this Q4 is saying, who is paying, Q5 is saying, who's paying for the inspection or report? And this is saying, who's required to fix it, pay for the fixes in the report. And typically that's seller if you're in one of those jurisdictions. Escrow fee, you can do both, which is 50-50, or you can do each pay their own fees. Escrow holder, owner fees. Typically in Sacramento area, most of the valley, the attrition is you split. You can either do both or each pay their own fees of escrow fees. Typically the seller pays the owner's title insurance fee. That's typically, remember it's different by county. If you get toward the Bay Area, it switches. Please note that.
Don,
Yes.
back up to 5 and 6. When you checked seller, you said seller pays for the fixes. Does the seller also pay for the initial inspection by checking those boxes?
Q5 is who pays for the inspection.
Okay.
Q6 is who pays for the requirements
Oh,
for
I see.
corrective or remedial actions from the inspection. So if
Okay,
you
I see.
check that both, one saying who's paying for the inspection, who's paying to correct the things in the inspection.
I
right?
understand. Okay, thank you.
Okay. Escrow is typically split, owner's titles thing. There's also another title policy that their buyer, if they're getting a loan, will get their own, lender will get a title. Typically the buyer pays that. There's county transfers, and there's some cities that have transfer tax. Typically the seller pays a transfer tax, sometimes a split. In areas where there's a city transfer tax, typically either it's split or the buyer sometimes pays it. Sometimes the seller pays it. This one really wobbles a lot, the city transfer tax. Not all cities have transfer taxes. City of Sacramento does. The next closest city, I believe, is the city of Vallejo. There was a law passed back in the day, a long time ago, for the county transfer tax, and it limited all city transfer taxes. But cities that were here prior to statehood, or prior to that law passing, which was right around statehood, can have their own tax. So the old cities, Sacramento, Vallejo, some of the old pioneer cities, can have their own city tax if they want to. So you see those. If you don't know, you can Google. All you have to Google is traditional California closing costs by county. Just Google that. All the major escrow companies do a sheet that show you how to split the costs by county. Please do that. If you're going into counties you are not aware of and how to split the costs, please note that. I'm telling you right now that it's both for escrow, seller pays this, seller pays county transfer, and maybe you split buyers. This would be typical for Sacramento. If I went into the East Bay, I went into Oakland to write an offer, this would be buyer, buyer, which would be traditional in Oakland. Make sense? If you wrote an offer that's like this, and this, and this, and then this for, because it's Sacramento, but you did in Oakland, the agent's going to laugh at you. And they're going to need to know it out of area. So please be aware of those code costs. If you notice this, HOA fee for preparing disclosures is automatically by state law required to be paid for the sellers. That's why I tell sellers, look, it's already required. The docs you have to disclose for the HOA to the buyer has to be already done. And these, it's a lot. It's not just, they say, I have the docs, I don't want to pay. It's not just the CC&Rs and the HOA rules. It's the minutes for the last 2 years. It's the minutes from the board meetings for the last 2 years. It's the audited financial statements from the last 2 years. So there's a lot. A very rare seller has all the docs. So typically you have to pay. So if there's a certification, sometimes the HOA, this is dumb. They have a cert fee, and sometimes they have a transfer fee. A lot of times the buyer pays the transfer fees, or both, or sometimes the seller, but usually the transfer fee is paid by the buyer. If the HOA has a cert fee, it's paid by the buyer. But don't worry, the cert fee and the buyer HOA transfer fees, along with the law that says the seller pays this, restricted the amount of the HOA transfer fees. You should have seen this. In the Great Recession time, when HOAs were hurting because of not a lot of payment dues, they started passing like $1,500 transfer fees for buyers to pay just because they were trying to get money. So the law came in and restricted that. But typically the buyer pays that. Typically you don't see buyer transfer fee, seller private transfer fees, but if there are, seller will do it. I don't want to go into it. They're so rare. If there's other fees or costs you want the buyer to pay or seller to pay, you wouldn't want to hear. Let's get to home warranty. Home warranty. Typically the seller usually will be providing a home warranty up to a certain amount. Please check the provider you want to protect. I recommend, and this is just personally, Fidelity home warranty. I have seen claim approval rates by the home warranty companies, and I would say Fidelity approves claims at about double the rate the other home warranties claim. That means your buyer makes a claim, they're more likely to approve it double of what the other home warranty companies are doing. So please, I would recommend them, which is here for National Home Warranty. I would go to Fidelity site. They have brochures. You want to put around. I had an agent that just put in $500 because said that should be enough. They got into contract. The actual bill was $670. She told the buyer, don't worry, I'm getting the seller to pay for it. The buyer had an extra bill at $270 for the balance at close of escrow. And the buyer's like, I thought you told me that the seller's paying for this. You're like, oops, I put the wrong number in. And guess what? The buyer's agent wrote a check for $270 to the buyer to offset because they messed up on the amount. And I see this all the freaking time. If you put an amount not to exceed and the amount for the home warranty exceeds that amount, the buyer pays the difference. So please put in the correct amount. Home warranty amounts change every year. So I recommend always going and getting it verified before you write this offer. Make sense? Don't go with the standard plan, go with the upgraded plan because it will be a lot better for your buyer. And this is a get out of jail free card. Honestly, I can tell you this. And even if the seller says no, buyer to pay, and buyer says, I don't want to pay it, guess what? I just credit at close and pay it for them as an agent if we close. You know why? Because of get out of jail free card. I don't know if anyone's been doing business a long time. I have had homes that seem great. We have inspections, everything's fine. And literally, we're in the middle of summer. They move in. The next day, the HVAC goes out. Inspection's fine. Everything's fine. It just goes out at random. I've had water heaters fail the day after close. At random. They're good. They fail. It's a lot easier to go to a buyer and say, hey, there's an $85 fee, and they'll come out and replace it or fix it, than saying, oh, I'm sorry. Right? Go ahead, Stephen T. You were talking? You say something?
No, I was agreeing with you, John. I was just saying, got a witness.
Got a witness, exactly. So, as just a rule, if the now I try to get the seller to pay it, but the seller doesn't, and the buyer asks it, and the counter buyer wants to pay it, I just say, hey, I'll pay it as a gift to you at close. It's my gift to you at close, and this is what it does. And they're like, oh, that's awesome, right? But I want get out of jail free card. I don't want an unhappy customer come to me because just on bad luck, something major went bad right after close of escrow, and we have no way to fix that cost. Make sense?
John, on a personal note, I buy a home warranty. I bought my house in 2019. I renewed my home warranty every year for the first 5 years because my home was 1977. And within 5 years' time, I have had to replace both water heat. I mean, it has paid for itself. So I let it lapse now because literally now everything in the house is new. But even if on the personal, renew those policies, it's worth the $600 because if something goes bad, it's going to cost.
I can tell you, I have rental properties and I have home warranty. I had home warranties on all my rental properties because I didn't want to handle the repairs, right? And it was cheaper. So I just had home warranties on them, right? So they're not bad, but they are, they will service, but I would recommend it. But if it's wrong on the inspection, they're not going to cover it. So if they say the HVAC's broken on the inspection and you go to close, they're not going to cover it. If it says it's working on the inspection, then they'll cover it later, right? So, okay. We're out of the RPA for dummies. So if you can fill all that out, you're sitting pretty. So if you any questions on all that part, it gets really fast after this, and we got 17 minutes to close this out. So after this, we have addendums. If it's a TOPA, if it's this is a RPA, and this is where it varies based on the type of transaction. So if you have a tenant occupied, it's tenant. If there's a probate, if it is a mobile manufactured home, not a mobile home, a manufactured home, which is different. Tenancy in common purchase. This is where it's really in niche sales. You tend to only see this in Bay Area where they're like a co-op community and you buy an interest into the co-op and you get a designated space. Don't worry about it unless you get into this type of thing. The listing will let you know this is a TIC. They call it TIC, tenants in common, TIC. A listing, you will know that. Generally, I only see that in the Bay Area. But if you're going to do into that, there's a lot of rules and things like that. So please be careful on those. Stock cooperative is the same thing. It's kind of taking a group of owners and buying a property, and you're getting shared use of the property. Maybe restricted time periods. Usually, you see these on stock cooperatives, like on a group vacation rentals, where you buy this luxury home, and it's in San Diego, and there's 8 buyers, and each buyer gets a month and a half in the property. Does it make sense? So that'd be like a stock cooperative, right? So. Mixed use purchase addendum. This is if you're doing a mixed use property. That means there's residential and other parts. Please do not use this addendum. If you're doing this, this is going to likely qualify as a commercial transaction. Please note commercial transactions are restricted. Residential agents cannot do commercial transactions. They must either co-it with a residential agent or refer to a commercial agent. Please note that because the liability is there. These are other addenda. Please note that if there's a short sale, if there's addendum, you're putting an additional addendum in place tied to the contract. It needs to be put in here. If you need to write additional language. Backup offer addendum. This is if you are submitting a backup offer. If you do an offer with a back offer addendum and the seller signs it, that means if the first buyer cancels, you automatically have first right to take the house. Septic, well, or property monument propane addendum. If there is a septic, a well, a property monument means some other man-made thing on the property. Propane addendum, that is not the house, I should say. Propane addendum, if those items are showing up in any of these rule, if you show up, you need to check that box. It'll pull a form in called the SWPI. It will tell you, it will say who pays for it'll go through the inspections. Who pays for the septic inspection? Who pays for the water quality and water pressure test inspection? It goes through all those things. So that way you just go those things hard at the front time. Buyer intent to exchange. This is if your buyer's investor intending to exchange or seller intent to exchange as well. This notifies the other side. There's these ones, wildlife to trust advisory, REO, probate advisory. This is all additional forms if you're buying with a trust, if you're buying an REO, if you're in a wildfire area, if you're in a probate as well. So I'm not going to go through these additional terms. Every one of these contract terms up here on the first 3 pages refer to more language on the back side here. This is all the language that applies to those check boxes, like I said. So I want to go forward. You just initial on every page, the buyer's initial on every page here through these time periods. I want to note one thing here. When we get there, which is a long way away, definitions, days, is liquidated damages, arbitration, mediation, arbitration. It behooves your client to agree to mediation, arbitration. If you sign this liquidated damages clause, if both parties sign it, it means the only amount, if they were in dispute and they got into a fight and they went to legal court battle or mediation arbitration, the most amount someone can win is the amount of the deposit. That's the liquidated damage clause. This mediation arbitration dispute says, buyer and seller, if you have a dispute, you can't just go to court. You have to go to mediation arbitration first. With that said, and that is true, but in California, if the amount of money you're fighting for is less than $10,000, small claims court available, the California Constitution allows anyone unfettered access to small claims court, and it overrides any contract agreement as long as the amount of the dispute is less than the small claims court amount. So if your deposit that you're fighting over is less than that, your buyer can opt, or seller can opt out of mediation arbitration, go directly to small claims court if they wanted to. But you don't have to worry about that. If you're having a dispute and someone is talking about mediation arbitration, you should have already got your broker involved in that conversation. Does it make sense? So, all right. If one party, buyers, if you initial this, but the sellers don't, then it is not agreed to. So you got to have both sides initial. So if I'm the seller, if the buyers don't initial it, then and I want the sellers to have it, then what I do is I have the sellers initial and I make them counter that they're going to sign it. Right? So okay, we're almost done here. Expiration of offer. If your buyer is an entity buyer, this is where you would check this box. This is what gets all the time. If you don't do this, if you don't check the box in their entity buyer, you're going to have to do a whole nother form. If you do this, you'll have to do a representative capacity signature disclosure form. So help your TCs, help your buyers not have to fill out more forms. If your buyer's entity, it would be like this: John Barnato Family Trust. It asks what's the entity's name. So if it's a trust or an LLC, they ask you put the full name there. And then they say down here, who's the legal signer? John Barnato. Does that make sense? If they're not an entity seller, don't check the box. You don't have to do that. But if you are, you need to put those things in. Does it make sense? And if you notice down here, it says, buyer signature says, buyer is John Barnato Family Trust. The legally authorized signer is John Barnato, and then you put in title. In this case, it's a trust, so I put trustee. Does it make sense? If it's an LLC, typically the title is going to be something like member. Does that make sense? Something like that. Does it make sense? The buyer doesn't sign John Barnato Family Trust. So don't send the DocuSign that says John Barnato Family Trust. Send the DocuSign as John Barnato. The buyer is just John Barnato Family Trust. Does that make sense? We've seen signatures where the signature by the seller is John Barnato Family by the buyers. That's not correct. That's not accurate. Entities are not living people. Only living people can sign a document. Does that make sense? So you got to make that distinction. The buyer is John Barnato Family Trust, but the buyer's legal representative is John Barnato as trustee of the trust. Clear? Clear as mud? If you have more than 2 signers, please check that box. It'll attach a form, additional signature ASA form, which will allow you to have multiple buyers sign this form. Okay. If you notice that first one, if it allows you 4 buyers, it's okay if literally you put 4 buyer signatures on here, 4 buyers initials, even though there's 2 spots, but you put 4 in there, we'll accept that too. So you can kind of squeeze them all in if you don't want to do the ASA. We'll accept that too. We just got to have them all clearly visible. Any questions on entities for buyers? Same thing about sellers. Now, if they're going to accept your offer and they're doing a seller counter offer, the practice is if you're on the list side, you get an offer, the seller is supposed to sign the whole offer and check this box and then counter the whole offer along the counter. I see a lot of lazy agents just do a counter offer. That is not correct. And actually, if your seller doesn't sign the original offer, you send a counter offer and the buyer signs it, you are not legally in contract till the seller signs the other RPA too. Just FYI. So we've had that dispute before too. So where we've had a fully executed seller counter offer, but not the fully executed RPA. And we had a dispute on when the start of escrow started. And it mattered because we were at close of escrow and they were trying to do fines and stuff. So those things all matter. So careful what you do. If they're an entity seller, this is where the seller is. Typically, you won't fill in the entity seller information if you're on the buy side. So I leave that blank. Typically, if the sellers are accepting or countering your offer, they'll sign counter and they'll usually check it. They'll put the box in and put the stuff in for their own seller to sign. So don't have to worry about it generally, unless they ask you through confirmation remarks will tell you to do that and some sort of instructions. Seller signs here. I just want to note an offer not accepted. This is not required, but it is good practice. If your seller is not accepting an offer, I generally put seller initials that they had not accepted an offer on this date. We send them to them. We ask for that on our close. So if you have a listing and you have multiple offers, we're going to ask you for seller rejecting the other offers. We want you to do this because we've had disputes, and trust me, you will get disputes where if you have a hot property, there's multiple offers and you put that contract in dual agency. You have a buyer and you get it in contract dual agency. Trust me, there's a lot of agents that are going to cry foul and want proof. And this is your get out jail free card where the seller says, yeah, I rejected the offer, right? Make sense? Okay. This is where agents fill out their information. It is customary that it is good practice and professionalism that you fill out the listing agent's information as well off of MLS. I see lazy agents that don't do it, and it's a practice that will make your listing agent unhappy with you. So just FYI. And if you're in a multiple offer situation, you want your listing agent happy with you. Presentation offer. This is your group. Remember, you have the right to present the offer. This says the seller broker presents this offer to the seller. The seller or agent would initial there and date there. This is saying proof that I presented the offer. Make sense? So I always fill this out if the seller's countering or the seller's accepting the offer. I put my initials and date there showing I presented the offer that day. Make sense? Are we cool on that? Escrow holder acknowledgement is typically when the escrow provides that. You don't have to worry about that. Presentation of offer. Are we good with those forms? Okay. Just additional forms here in the last 6 minute. Buyer investigation agency. This is just saying, hey, buyer, you have the right to investigate the property, and these are the things you should look at. Pretty simple. Nothing big about this. It just talks about square footage, acres, boundaries, soil, all this other stuff. Just have the buyer sign. Possible representation of more than one buyer. I'm going to say, I got to touch on this a little bit. This is talking about dual agency. This says buyer. I have the right to represent other buyers on the same house. This says I have the right to represent other buyers and write offers on the same property. This says also I can be a dual agent. I can be the listing agent, and that's okay. Does that make sense? So, I'm going to note that. Sorry, they changed this form a little bit. Dual agency and trade. In the event of dual agency, seller and buyer agree that if a dual agent may or not without person, you have one, if you're going to do dual agency, number one thing, you must disclose it. If you're a listing agent on the buy side, you got multiple offers, you gotta say, I have these 6 offers, and this one of the offers is from me. You gotta disclose that because you will earn both sides of the commissions under that. Well, one side and then also negotiated buy side. There's 2 things on this. A dual agent may not, without the express permission of respective party, disclose to the other party confidential information, including but limited to facts related to the buyer or seller's financial position, motivations, bargaining position, or other personal information that may impact the price, including selling willing to accept a price less than list price, or the buyer's willingness to pay a price greater than the price offered. So, if you tell the buyer, hey, write an offer with me, and the sellers are probably willing to go down less than list price, so let's light it here, you have violated your fiduciary to the seller, period, end of story. If you were sued, they would win. The seller would win. If you have a buyer dual agency and they're approved up to 500, your house is listed at 500, but they want to offer 475, but they said, if we really want the house, if they counter, we'll go up. And you go to your seller and say, hey, let's counter this at 500 because they'll come up if you want to. Violation of buyer fiduciary. Period. Done. End of story. You lose. Does it make sense? If you're doing a dual agency transaction, you cannot disclose to the other party the buyer's ability to move off the list price or the offer price and their ability or willingness to move off that price. You cannot disclose that.
Sometimes it's best to refer it.
So a lot of agents don't like that. Number one way lawsuits happen is dual agency transactions, right? When lawsuits happen against agents, number one way, and it's crazy. It's literally like 60% of lawsuits against agents are a result of dual agency transactions because you can hide so much stuff in here, right? So
Greed.
greed, basically. So how do I handle this if I'm a dual agency situation? Like, John, what do you think? Is this a good offer? On the sell side, I said, Mr. and Mrs. Seller, let's review the comps again. Let's talk about why we listed the home at this property, and let's talk about the comps that may have happened since the time we listed the property that may revise how we want to respond. And I reviewed the comps and I said, based on these, how do you think about the offer and what do you think we should respond at? Make sense? And make them say a number.
John,
Yes.
are you saying then that you might run a new current CMA because maybe
Yes,
it's been on the
likely.
market for 6 to 8
Because
weeks?
you can't tell them what's a good offer or not. This is a
Okay.
good offer. This is a good offer. The buyers are going to perform. Now you're telling, does it make sense? You're guaranteeing things. That's fraud, right? Does it make sense? So, and you know you can't disclose anything. You don't want to disclose anything that may tell the seller the buyer's willingness to move off the offer price. You cannot say that, right? So what I say is, let's review the comps and let's see if you still believe the house is worth $500,000 when we listed it, based on new information. Current old comp, the comps we looked at, and the new comps. And I review that with them. I say, hey, look, this other house just went closed, and it's same model, and we know it was pending. We didn't know, we thought it was there, but it went in at 485. What do you think now? And the buyer's like, yeah, can we do 490? The seller's like, can we do 490? Fantastic. Counter at 4. Don't even ask questions. Don't even push them on it. 490 is the counter price. Make sense? Same thing with the buyer. The buyer says, and often buyers are going to say, come to you, and especially multiple offer situations, the agent, I want to use you, agent, because I want the deal. I'll pay you a commission. You'll do agency, we'll do agency and you'll get the double end. But I want a super deal. And I tell agents, I can't do a super deal, meaning I am not going to tell the seller or influence the seller to accept your offer if it's less than the other offers or less quality in terms than the other offers. I am not doing that. I would should do that. One thing I can do is though, I can tell you where the other offers are. Offers are not necessarily confidential. You see it right there, 2A. Offers are not necessarily confidential. I could tell you, buyer, what the other offers are, and I could tell you how to be the best offer. But you have to be willing to go there. And if you want that information, I can provide that information. But it's up to you to write the offer that will be accepted by the seller, not that I'm giving you a deal. If you start promising a deal like that, trust me, that's where I've seen an agent in our office, this is a long time ago, lose their license over this. Lose their license over this issue, literally. He had 7 offers. One was dual agency. It was the lowest offer by far. All other 6 offers were higher. And he didn't present the other offers because he wanted the dual agency and had her sign, and they found out. And DORA found out and revoked his license.
He wasn't too smart.
Stephen T might know who he is. Okay, fair housing and discrimination. You can't. I just want to know, these are protected classes. These you can't discriminate. And in your marketing, you can't refer anything. If you're marketing this, you can't refer anything like this. Medical condition. These are protected things. Does that make sense? Immigration is the primary language. Military, you can't do anything. Close to Bill Air Force Base.
Do
You could
not
get in trouble.
discriminate.
You could get you could do discrimination on that, right? You're trying to discourage non-military people to not look at the house, right? So be very careful on your descriptions of the house that you put on Metro List and out there, because if it refers or discourages or encourages any of these classes, you are literally doing a fair housing violation. And it's super easy because it's public. Literally, California Fair Housing and Employment will literally just print it out, send it to you, and have a case. Done. So you're done. So FYI. And buyers and sellers sign that. Buyers, homeowners insurance advisory. This is a new form in there just saying, hey, buyers, be careful because insurance is wacky right now and you need to figure that out. Okay. Wire fraud and transfer advisory. I would recommend you talk to them about this. It's just another form, but I recommended wire fraud is bad. We've literally had a buyer, first-time home buyer. She was a single mom. Her mom passed away. They got life insurance, $300,000. They spent it to buy a $275,000 house. This single mom didn't really have a job, was on welfare, buying this house cash, and she got frauded. That someone hacked the escrow officer's email and emailed wire instructions that was wrong and sent the money to Russia or something. This was in Roseville. $275,000 gone. Buyer did not get the money back. There's no fund, nothing. She lost the house. Done. So I tell people this: you are going to wire funds. You do not get the funds from me. You do not get the wire instructions from me. I do not provide wire instructions.
John.
So if you get an email from me saying I wire instructions, that is a fraudulent email. FYI. 2, you only get the wire instructions from escrow, and they will not email them to you. They will give it to you at time of signing. Or if they do give it to you by email, it'll be through a secure portal where you can get that. And before you wire, I'd recommend calling the escrow officer and verifying that account information prior to wiring money. Yes.
I had a situation, it actually happened to me before I was with you and I was with the other broker, because I tell every one of my clients, when you get the wire instructions from the title company, call me, and then I will call the title company and confirm the information given to you. That actually happened, and the title company said, those are not our instructions. The account number is wrong. We have not sent it out yet. So
And
they
I can
had-
tell you this:
Yeah.
most escrow companies worth their salt nowadays. will not send those instructions via email. And they all have secure portals. Well, they'll do it through a secure portal, or they'll do it only at the signing, literally physically there, say, here's
Right.
the instructions,
Well,
right?
and like I said, this was years ago before I was with you. And yeah, it does happen. It could have happened to my client.
So wire fraud is real. Please, 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 when you're doing this form, this is the reason it's in there. You need to have a conversation with your buyers about wire fraud, because the last thing you want is that situation where your buyer is out $275,000 cash. And it's because, and we've had it before. I've had other instances where they didn't hack the escrows, they hacked the realtor's email. And the escrow instruction, I mean, the wire instructions came from the realtor's email. And guess what? That realtor was on the hook because they did not adequately protect their data. And which goes to the next form, Consumer Privacy Act Advisory Disclosure Notice. This says, you, as a real estate agent, you must protect your client's data. Not only that, you have to be careful. You have to have virus software. You have to have firewalls. You shouldn't be on Starbucks open network with your laptop doing transactions. Does that make sense? And if you don't, and there's a breach, you may be liable. And this disclosure says, buyer, just in case you wanted to know, I'm liable for a breach of data. If you have a breach of data and it's my fault, this is what this form says. So, FYI. Any questions? That is the last of the standard forms on this contract. I went 6 minutes over. I apologize. But here we are. Any last minute questions on the RPA or other forms to there?
No. Well spoken.
No? Okay. I appreciate you guys. Next week's Tuesday, 1:30, we're talking listing agreements and CMAs. I will talk a listing agreement and I'll also comp properties and talk CMAs there as well and how to produce those. Caroline, you had a
John?
question? Yes.
John,
Jose.
before you leave, I have a question for you. I have a potential client right now. He was injured and received a large settlement, and he wants to buy a home cash.
Okay.
How long does his money needs to be seasoned at the bank before we can do anything?
None.
None?
If he
Okay.
if he buys the house purely cash, no seasoning is required. Although, if the seller demands a bank statement, you might have to wait a month, right, to get an actual bank statement for proof of funds. The seasoning requirement of funds only comes into place when there is a loan.
Oh, perfect. Perfect. And
But
how
if he was
close?
using a lot of cash and getting a loan, then you would have to season the funds. But if it's just
got
pure
it.
cash, no seasoning is required. So
Perfect. Okay.
cash
Because
is like going to Walmart and just buying it, right? That's cash, right? So
okay. Okay. All right. Sounds good. And how quickly can a sale, a purchase of that kind, how quickly can it close?
okay, there won't be a lender involved, so you would talk to escrow. I've seen
Okay.
typically they'll ask for at least 10 days to close escrow.
Right.
I've seen that. But you'll want to talk to the escrow officer and see if you want to go quicker or a little bit longer. They know their timelines, right? So
Awesome. Awesome.
Okay,
Thank
that's
you,
it.
John.
Caroline, you had a question.
Thank you.
You're muted. You're muted, Caroline.
I just wanted to know if you could stay on for a moment after the meeting.
I can't. I have another meeting, but I'm happy to do a call with you later. So,
Okay, I'll call you. I'll text you and set up an appointment.
okay, sounds good. Any other questions out there? I appreciate your time. Thank you so much. This will be recorded. It will be put onto our YouTube channel. If you're not aware of that, it will put in circle 2. But we have a YouTube channel, KW Sac Metro. If you go there, you will see the broker. You'll see these videos start showing up there. I appreciate you guys. Have a great time. And thank you for spending 2 hours with me on the RPA. Peace out.
Thanks, John.
Thank you, John.
Thank you, John.
Thanks, John.